Warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and welcome to today's show of Open Dialogue. I'm Miss Marhoon, and I'm glad to be with all of you today. Hosting this show where we've been talking about different topics which have, for example, have been to do with, for example, social or have a cultural significance. The topic of today to be discussed is on Western Muslims and fatherhood. A saying of the Holy Prophet's, peace be upon him's grandson, Imam Sajjad alayhi salam, about father being the root of a child, in the rights of the father includes, and the right of your father is that you should know that he is your root and you are his branch, and without him you would not be. Whenever you see anything in yourself which pleases you, you should know that your father is the root of its blessing upon you. So praise God and thank him in recognition of that. And there is no power but in God. So this verse is obviously about the father being the root of the child. Over here, Imam Sajjad points out the most fundamental cause-effect relationship between a father and his child. This scientific and philosophical principle states that the father is the root of the child, or the cause of the existence of the child. Were it not for the existence of the father, the child would not exist. The existence of the child is dependent on the existence of his father. This is manifested all over the world. Imam reminds the children of the importance of the existence of the father and explicitly declares that the father is the root and the children are like his branches. Thus, whatever is manifested in the child has its roots in the existence of his father. Another important issue is that once a child is born, he starts to grow up and continues his development while his father may have already completed his growth or be near its completion. Now, to discuss this topic on Western Muslims and fatherhood, and to answer some of our questions, we have today joining us Razwan Faraz. Razwan Faraz is a father of three sons, his eldest being 22 years old, currently at university, finishing off his degree in philosophy and psychology, and his other sons are a 17-year-old and also a 14-year-old son. Mr. Faraz used to work in education and was deputy head of a state primary school. He moved into the humanitarian sector, where he oversees the community team for a large humanitarian charity here in the UK, Human Appeal. Alongside that, he runs an organisation called Man Sheds. Also, alongside our guest, we have our resident Alim, who is on our religious advisory board, Molana Syed Muhammad Sibtin Razavi. So I'd like to first start with asking Syed Muhammad Razavi to talk to us more about the father being the root cause of the child and the head of the family. If you can talk to us a bit about this, please.
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Yes, from Islamic point of view or nature's point of view, some people can believe in religion. We can all agree that father is the root of any family or smallest unit of the society. Although we do mention father, but similarly the importance has been given to mother as well, but the responsibility is more given to the father of the family, and if the father is not caring about the future generation and upbringing of the family, the result will be felt on the smallest unit of the society, which is the family. That's why all the responsibility goes on the neck of the father. I mean, even in the cases of dispute and problems, we usually tell the couple. For example, I've seen in many cases of dispute, ladies fight to take care of the children and have the responsibility of the children. And I usually tell them that from Islamic point of view, if anything goes wrong, the father will be questioned on the day of judgment. Unless the lady has played a very crucial role in misguiding the children, then of course she will be questioned as well. But again, father will not be forgiven for choosing such a mother for the children. So father has a great responsibility in establishing a family, which is the smallest unit of the society. If the smallest unit of the society is perfect, then we can imagine the society will be going in the right direction. Inshallah, we will elaborate more further on in the discussion how to deal with the problems and how to establish authority. And establishing authority does not mean that we should be dictators and harsh, and how we should follow the examples set by Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the companions and the family of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ.
Inshallah. Thank you very much, Sayyid Muhammad Razavi. So now we're going to move on to Brother Rizwan Faraz. So to start off, I mean, I mentioned in the introduction that you currently work with, I think, two organizations, Human Appeal and what was the name? Man Sheds. So
Yeah.
can you please talk to us more about these organizations and what you do, especially Man Sheds, and what do you do for fathers, and who do you basically cater for?
Yeah, thank you. Firstly, thank you so much for inviting me to be a guest on the show. I really appreciate being able to talk to yourselves and to your audience, and perhaps give and shed some light on something that may help some of the fathers or those men who want to become fathers, and maybe even mothers who want to support their husbands in their journey as fathers itself. You may or may not know that right now there is, I would say, a tragedy occurring before us in relation to how men function. If you look at here in the UK, 3 out of every 4 suicides are from men. So 75% of all deaths of suicide are by men. Every day, around 12 men are unfortunately dying by suicide, which is really tragic if you really think about how the biggest death for those who are under the age of 45 is suicide, and how this in itself is an indication of the way men are seeing themselves, and in comparison to how women are seeing themselves. If you just look at a few other statistics that I've got before me, 94% of convicted murderers are men. And the 6% of women who are convicted murderers, it is said that they themselves received a lot of abuse at the hands of men. 95 or more than 95% of the prison population here in the UK is actually men itself. So if you look at this as a context on how men are, we have to question how are men functioning in this society itself. And within that society, we cannot ignore the role fathers play in their children's lives. I mean, typically, a father will be judged or judge himself even in how he prepares his children for the wider world, how he protects his children from, and equally how he provides for them. So he provides for them, he protects them, he prepares them for the wider and outer world. But what about the inner world? And so I set up an organization called Mansheds that aimed to firstly provide a place for men to come together, to discuss the things that don't typically allow them to talk about, whether it's their own individual challenges, relationship challenges, parenting challenges. But at the same time, I invite them and I take them through a process. I teach them on understanding what actually is our purpose. And I don't necessarily just work with Muslims, although a significant group within the people I work with are from the Muslim background. But I remind them that ultimately our purpose has to be beyond that which is the material. The material gains with which we judge ourselves are crippling the way we then interact with each other. If you think about it, a father looks at another person, another father, and maybe sees that he's got a better car, or he's got more degrees, or he's got more wealth, or he's got a bigger home, and therefore he feels inadequate. And that inadequacy that he's now wrapped his identity around leads him to think that actually I am now incapable of being the best father that I can to my children. And so what I do is I tend to invite these fathers, these men, to think about what does parenting, what does fathering, what does living look like outside of these worldly attachments that in this capitalist materialistic society we have so readily identified ourselves with these things. And as a result, we are now crippled when we are on the lower end of that ladder itself. So that's really the main crux of the work that I do.
Thank you very much, Brother Razwan. So now I'm going to move on to you, Syed Razavi. So I believe in your line of work. You deal with a lot of fathers, like including single fathers, and those from your broken marriages. And I just want to know what are the main problems that you come across that these men are dealing with.
Well, it depends on the circumstances that they were brought up themselves. If the fathers were brought up in a troubled society and troubled family, of course, they are going to reflect on the children and the family they are bringing up. But that is not an excuse. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us freedom of choice and has guided us to move towards perfection by recognizing our fault and problems in the society. Yes, from psychological point of view, the brother would be the ideal person to discuss the impacts and how damaging it is and how is it possible to rescue father from this situation. But first step has to be taken by the father himself by acknowledging that there is a problem. If the father doesn't accept, then the problem cannot and never be solved. And this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Quran also says, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَا يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِقَوْمٍ حَتَّى يُغَيِّرُ مَا بِأَنفُسِهِمْ. Although Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells about everyone that Allah does not change people, people have to change themselves first. So once people have taken the first step, then blessings come. Blessings are what, I mean, for example, if you go out and say that I need help, I need support, I have this problem, please help me. What are the blessings? Blessings are when you open up, people come to you and people help you. Then the next step that is in Islamic teachings is that when you are seeking a guide, you should have the criteria of selecting a spouse in seeking the guidance. So you have to look for the best guide, best person, best expert in the field who is not biased, and professionally those who are being brought up as psychologists, therapists, they are told and educated on this subject that they should not bring their personal interest into helping others. They should be only a reflection of what the person is going through, and then they should listen and listen and listen, and then maybe by listening they should provide the help needed for the person. Uh, uh, so yes, I mean, in the divorce cases that I see, in quite a lot of those cases, it's the father who is usually blamed. Although I have cases where ladies have been blamed as well, because they were careless and they were not taking care of the child, and even the social workers got uh, into the conflict and decided to give the child or children to the father. There are rare cases like that as well, but in majority of the cases, it is quite opposite, because the fathers are not playing the role that they should play in the family. So these are the basic things that I witness, and there are more points. Inshallah, later on I will elaborate more. I'm sure
Inshallah.
brother has more to say. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for what you've shared.
Yeah. What can you say about that? Before I move on to the other questions that I had for you, what can you say about what Syed Rizvi had just said about that the men are not playing their roles in being a father, being a good father?
Yeah, I think you've really touched on something really important there, which is that you cannot prepare children if you're not really understanding the journey you yourself must take. I think that the true fatherhood is preparing a child in a holistic sense, not just readying your child to get a job. I mean, when I was a teacher, I've not been a teacher for many years now, but when I was a teacher, every single year I would ask children, why do you come to school? And it would break my heart to hear them say every single year, a new group of children that would come into my class, that the reason why they've come to school is to get a job. And it would be my role to tell them, even though I was a maths teacher, that actually education is way more than just an academic certificate that then allows you to open the door potentially to get a job. But actually, the people that you surround yourself with will impact you, and you must learn from the ones and choose to benefit from those. And I think that the challenge we have is, as particularly the communities that are watching this TV show today, is that the Muslim male in the media is portrayed in a very negative sense. And so if you just think about a typical Muslim boy or a Muslim girl, how many incidents is she observing on film or on TV where she is seeing Muslim men? And how many of those are positive and how many of those are quite derogative and degrading? Because when you have Muslims portrayed as terrorists or portrayed as criminals or portrayed as buffoons, which is very typical when we see these blockbuster movies and they show a Muslim which has not really got any sense of themselves, then what it does is it gives them a visual representation of a poor role model. And so as a father, we are compelled then to think about how do we become a central role model for our children to the point where they can have that taqwa and that reliance upon Allah and that almost the fear of Allah, in a way, not that they are scared, but that they know that their intention and their niyyah is only for Allah, and that that's what then becomes their driver for doing good and avoiding any bad. As opposed to what happens is the father's absent, or he's typically working. Maybe he's providing. Maybe he's giving them the latest trainers, the latest gimmicks and games and technology that is on offer. But it fails to provide the child with the necessary spiritual tools to navigate a very materialistic society. Our children are being driven to compare themselves to other children based on what they possess. And these possessions, our children are struggling, if you see, around us, that they will mock a child because a child has maybe trainers on of a lower brand, in terms of economically, I guess. So it's really important for those fathers to really think about, I call it the 3 C's of parenting, the 3 C's. The first C is cultivation. The first C is connection, and that's you literally when a baby's born, you have no intention to do anything but just connect with that child. And you're just there showing love without any expectation, but just to connect. The second C is that of cultivation. When a child begins to gain some consciousness, you then begin to nurture within that child ideas of what is good for them and what actually is inauthentic for their heart. And then the third C is that of correction. And what typically happens is you see a lot of fathers correcting their children because they have failed to cultivate values. And the reason why they struggle to cultivate values is because the connection isn't there. And connection very much is a non-performative relationship dynamic. But typically, as men, we're in the wider world, and in the spaces that we are in, they're very performative. Everything is transactional. Everything is you do this for me, I do this for you. And so we have to take that off when we are within the home and connect with our children, because then our children will see us and regard us as role models for them to be like, as opposed to someone that's just telling them what to do.
Definitely. Can you talk to us more about the challenges that men are facing in today's world? I mean, other than challenge of providing for the family. I mean, what else are you seeing? When you see these men in the men's shed.
Yeah, I find there's a lot of competing. A number of issues come down to the competing attachments that children have, as fathers we're talking about. So there's challenges that men face themselves. Typically, what I find is that there is a certain idea of life that these men have, and that idea isn't fulfilled. And so what typically happens is these men then begin to live multiple lives at the same time. There's the life they wish they had. There's the life that they wish they don't ever have. There's the life that they currently have, and none of them really match. There's a conflict, so to speak, between the way that these fathers are journeying their fathering, because they think, well, I shouldn't have done this, I should have done that. And it's always associated with things that were in the past that they cannot change anymore. And so the thing I find that men struggle with is, as fathers anyway, is they fail to recognize the competitive nature of their child's attachment to other spaces. So, for example, in this country, as you know, and I think it's in many places, children are spending the vast majority of their day with other children. And so for 11 to potentially 13 to potentially even 16, 17 years of a child's life, from when they are in nursery all the way to college, maybe even at university, a vast majority of that child's or that individual's day is spent with their peers, with other children who are the same age as them. Why is this a problem? The problem is, if you think about culture, if you think about values, they are inherited from those elders to those who are younger. But if a child is spending the vast majority of their time with other children of the same age, that child then begins to have attachment more to the other child than they do to their parent. And that peer dynamic is incredibly damaging for children. Why? Because those children then are learning about life from other children who don't know about life itself. It's like a person wanting to study medicine, going into a medical college and never actually meeting a professor, but learning how to operate as a surgeon with a fellow student who's never also operated on it. You know this would be a disaster. And yet, many of the lives that children are living are built in such a way that children are more attached to these peers than they are to their parents. Now, what happens then is when you've got two parents who are not on the same page, the child then has even more reason, subconsciously, maybe not even conscious, subconsciously, to find safety in places where they are welcomed and accepted, even if those places are actually damaging and dangerous to their well-being. Because they're accepted there, because there's an element of them being celebrated, even if it is on a false premise, those children will then disconnect from their parents. And then what typically happens is the parents go into, remember the 3 C's, they go back into the corrective mode. They try to correct their child, they tell the child off, they criticize the child, but actually none of that's working. What you've got to ask yourself is, have I cultivated these values? So I try to invite the men to distinguish, at what point did your child lose a connection with you? And once you've connected, and this is the biggest struggle, because as men, we are socially more nurtured to be able to get the job done, to take the risk, to get out there, and to be very definitive in how we navigate life itself. And so with our children, I invite the men to almost put this tool aside and say, when it comes to your children, you can't see it in that same mechanical way. You can't look at loving a child as an equation. It can't be, I will do this and then my child will give me this. Because in the workspace, that's what happens. But within the home space, what's actually needed is your child has to feel safe. And if the father himself is not living an authentic life himself, he will struggle to provide a space of belonging for his children, because he'll constantly want them to perform to his demands as opposed to them living authentically and honestly.
Thank you very much. So now, the next question I'm going to ask, to Brother Razwan and as well as Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi, is what is the difference between parenting and fathering, as well as mothering and fathering? So first, I'd like Sayyid Muhammad to answer that. I mean, according to Islam, what is the difference between fathering as well as mothering?
Well, I mean, the society we are growing has lots of problems, and there are many mothers who play the both role, and there are some cases where the fathers have to play both role in the society, which makes it more difficult. We live in a different kind of society compared to what Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to live. They didn't have such a big cities that we have today, and people were more close to each other and ready and willing to help each other. So if we are not living that kind of lifestyle, of course, we have to face certain problems, and probably one of the reasons for high rate of divorce in the community is that we have lost that bond and connection that used to exist during Prophet Muhammad's time, and it doesn't exist anymore. As brother was mentioning, connection is very important. This reminds me of incident which took place during Prophet Muhammad's time. He was going on his horse or whatever he was traveling on, he suddenly witnessed some children fighting with each other, and there was big argument going on, and some children were crying and shouting at each other. So when he witnessed this, he got off the horse that he was riding on. He came down and brought himself to the level of the children and established eye connection with the children and spoke to them in the language they could understand, rather than giving a philosophical lecture and telling them off and promising them punishment and this and that. He established eye connection, then he talked to them, and then the result was all of the children who were fighting and arguing ended up having a friendship with each other, and he solved the problem by bringing himself as a prophet down to the level of children and establishing the connection. So I think this is what is needed. I mean, our schools, I was listening to another program about education and nurturing. They were discussing that nowadays we have calculators, computer, Google, which answers so many questions. So we should not waste our children's time in forcing them to memorize timetables and some rigid rules and memorizing them. We should teach them how to be human beings, how to take care of each other. Then they will automatically learn a lot from the resources available around them. If they have the basic guidelines, what to pick and how to choose what is right and what is wrong, they will be following the right steps. So we have to change a lot. Even Prophet Muhammad used to say that when you are bringing up your children, bring them up for the future generation. They are not being brought up during your period of time. They are going to be the fathers and the future generation. So they need to be educated more than what, for example, if whatever we have learned about Islam, we need to do more than that about our children in a very modern and different way that is more beneficial for the future children. And we should, of course, we are not infallible. We do mistakes. Our parents might have done some mistakes. We should learn from their mistakes. We might have done some mistakes. We should learn from those mistakes and try to pass a better model to the future generation.
Inshallah, thank you very much. So over to you, Brother Razwan. So I would like you to now, tell us, what the difference is between parenting and fathering, mothering, please.
That's a good question. I think, I guess for those who are listening in and watching today, it's important to ask yourself, well, what is the difference between fathering and mothering? And I think to answer that, we've got to ask ourselves, what's the context within which we frame that question? What I mean by this is fathering 100 years ago the same as fathering today? If you look at life 100 years ago, mainly my grandparents, my great-grandparents, who were migrants who came into this country, my great-grandfather or grandfather, they worked, they went out, they would go out into the field, or they would, in the case of my grandfather, he sometimes worked in other cities and other countries. And so the raising of the child was not just left to the mother, it was actually left to the whole village. And the whole village, uncles, aunts, would provide the support to the mother to raise that child. Now, when we migrated over here into this country, and if you think about post-World War, And us coming into this country, now the context of the family unit, and by family, I don't mean just mother, father, and children. I mean the wider family unit that would raise the children. That family unit has now completely crumbled. It is very rare to find families where the child is being raised by neighbors, by uncles, aunts on a ready basis. Typically, we are visited by uncles and aunts. We're not raised by them. That's the key difference between the environment before and the environment today. And so within that context, to answer the question of what was fathering maybe 100 years ago, it would have been primarily to provide security, to provide protection, to provide food, to prepare that child for the wider world, and to go out and to earn a wage to support that child. That would be one main factor of the father, to give the child enough confidence that the child can go out there and meet the world itself. And if the father left, so to speak, the preparing of the child's inner world to the village, not just the mother, and I need to emphasize that, but to maybe the grandfather or maybe the uncles, the aunts, the neighbors, the shopkeepers who were surrounding that child and providing that child with a safe place of belonging, then in that context, it could be okay for a father to focus on the wider world. But in today's day and age, where that has completely crumbled, it is even more important for a father to enter within the home to provide well-being for that child. Because without the well-being, the child will find themselves in a very angry state. If you think about our children in the society, the capitalist, racist society that we're living in, there is a lot to be angry about. There's a lot of injustice in the world, directly and indirectly happening to us. If you think about the social care, the health care, the educational care that we are receiving, we're not receiving what we absolutely deserve. Right now, if you just think about how the NHS is being totally obliterated by the Tory party and the governments, and what we've got to be thinking about is, in all of this anger and rage that we're experiencing, a father has to be able to give his child the well-being and the nurture, as well as the preparation to be confident to meet the world on the outside. They've got to be able to prepare them for the inside and how that child navigates not being accepted in this world itself. And so we've got to accept our children, provide love to our children as fathers, and not just think we are here to provide and protect and prepare, but we've got to be able to nurture well-being for our children, to love them, to care for them, so that that child feels a real strong sense of belonging. And at the same time, I honestly believe that where we as a collective are failing is that we have failed to provide true spaces that are of belonging outside of any condition. So for example, yes, the mosque is a beautiful place for people to go to, but it is somewhat conditional. There is a certain behavior expected there. There is a certain performance to a degree of when people come into those places. Where do you go when you are totally vulnerable? Where do you typically find yourself going? If the home itself is not safe for a child to go to, or when they're growing up and becoming adults themselves, if it's not safe for them to go to, then where do they go to? And so we've got to, as fathers, create those spaces that maybe not even our own children, but maybe our grandchildren and their friends will benefit from these places, where our children find a sense of belonging that is totally accepting them as they are, and at the same time enables them to feel accepted for who they are, especially in a society that doesn't accept them, but at the same time prepares them and gives them the confidence that they need to be able to meet life's challenges and whatever life throws at their way.
It's amazing how much fathering and mothering has changed in the past hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I have the next question I would like to ask is to you, Brother Razwan. So what is the impact of colonialism and migration upon the psyche of men from migrant backgrounds, and how has it impacted them in today's world?
Good question. I mean, we've touched a little bit on this before. I think if you think about many of our forefathers were subjects of colonialism, and typically they were subjugated by the authorities, and resources were stolen from our lands and used to build this country. And if you were living in that time when you were a subject of or a colony of any of these colonial states, you would have felt disempowered, disgruntled, and without real. It could be argued that you were either very angry or very without hope. And so, what could have happened typically for some fathers, there's a trauma that comes when the state itself is being oppressive towards you. We know that colonialism was oppressive towards our forefathers. And we then came over here post World War to find some economic betterment of our lives, as a part of the Commonwealth. But we haven't really been accepted as equal citizens. And so there are policies and practices in place. You can see them in the way that our children are being treated in schools and places, is that we're not really fully accepted and integrated by policy, by protocol, by process. We're not really accepted in this country itself. And so I think that migration, typically for my father who came over here, his uncles that came over here to this country, that they will have had certain traumatic experiences when they were met with the people who were already here, white English people who would have rejected them, didn't accept them. You can then feel that, just imagine for a moment, you right now travel to another country, you don't know the language, you're trying to find a job, you're being hurled racism from your neighbors. It can leave you feeling very much insecure and almost paranoid about your place in this society. And I would hear typically all the time from my uncles, from my aunts, from my parents, that they are going to kick us out. This is not a place where we belong. They're going to kick us out. We need to go back. We need to build back home. We need to do all of these things. And this was something that would happen. So if you imagine now that we are third and fourth generation, there are certain traumas that have not been given the time to talk about. We've not really allowed those traumas to leave our bodies. And so we're still carrying much of that anxiety that actually, do I belong here? And now with the recent changes in the law, which has meant that the government can literally strip us of our citizenship, even though we were born here, but just simply because our parents came from, migrated here, giving no regard to any of the fact that we were born here, they can strip us of our citizenship, which makes it even more insecure for us to really think, well, how do I navigate here when they're robbing me of my basic need to be secure? And so I think it's impacted the way that we see ourselves. It's impacted the way that we see each other. If you have a sense of paranoia instilled into the minds of people, then it does leave people feeling suspect over themselves. It's a classic divide and conquer type of mentality and approach. And so I would say that we are at a very difficult time in our lives, I think, where we've got to try our very best to create our own narrative and our own pathway, which is one that is a reliance upon Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ultimately, that's the thing that will get us through all of this. Regardless of what troubles come upon anyone, if we surrender totally to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we will be able to understand what aspects of my life do I need help with? What aspects of my life do I need to act upon, rather than just giving up and believing that I can't do anything about my child's education, or I can't do anything about my child's health, or I can't do anything about my child's well-being because I'm in this country and I can't do anything about it. And there's a typical, I just give up and we become passive. So the challenges that we're facing from post-migration, post-colonialism, is where do we as fathers continue to act, and where are we actually being passive in the way that if you just look at the streets that our children walk upon, littered with dirt and rubbish, and people just throw them in certain areas that are populated densely by Muslims. There isn't a care there. And I'm not blaming the locals. I'm saying that there is a certain level of disregard that we are giving. Yes, the state itself doesn't push resources into our areas, but we cannot just ignore that. We've got to act. We've got to do what we can do. And so I hope that I'm emphasizing the point that there are challenges outside of us. But in all of that, the biggest challenge for us is where can we actually act and do, and not stay passive to the challenges that we're facing as Muslims or as fathers here in this country.
Definitely. So, I just want it's actually a question for both of you. I think, like, in all of this, I think it's really good for children to have, to have good role models. So, how important is it to have good role models, and why? This question firstly to Sayyid Muhammad Rizvi, according to Islam, how important is it to have good role model?
Yes, role models are very important, and first of all, as Muslims, we should pick the role models from history and Islamic history, especially, so they learn from them. Of course, those role models do not exist at present, and if we look at the present society, we have very few role models. So it is the responsibility of the mosques and Islamic centers, especially those who are living in non-Muslim society, to create role models from within the society and the community that the children are growing up. So it's a big responsibility, and when those role models are created, then of course it will be much easier to encourage the children to follow them. Uh, I was looking at an interview of some children, and they were being asked who is Hassan, who is Hussain, who is Fatima, who is Ali, all these Islamic characters, and majority of them didn't even know anything about them, what they did. So it's the responsibility of the media and the schools and educational authorities, Islamic educational authorities, to go into the history and maybe use the modern facilities like cartoons and social media and theater and art and other things to bring those images back into our community and society, and then inshallah bring a better role model with the education and training for the present day and life and future, what they are going to need in future, and they should be equipped with everything that they need in future.
Yes, definitely. So yeah, we've actually coming to the end of the show now. So I have one last question for Brother Razwan. So I want to know, what advice would you give to someone who is struggling as a father, to someone who has a difficult relationship with his children, and how would you go about, bettering yourself as a father?
I'm minded of the time, so I'll keep it very short. Just a reminder of what I said earlier is remember the 3 C's. The first C is connect, the second C is cultivate, the third C is correct. If you are struggling with your child, then it's very likely that you are correcting far too much. And if you are correcting far too much, then maybe you haven't cultivated enough teaching with your child. And you can only teach your child if you're actually connected with your child. So understand that, go right back. When you used to pick up that child when that child was a baby, you didn't expect it to do anything. You just connected. So ask yourself, as a father, how often am I just going up to my children and spending time with them and just connecting? No expectation. I'm not giving them words of wisdom or anything like that. I'm just connecting, because I can guarantee you, if you're struggling with your child, then your moments of connection are smaller, if non-existent, and you're probably spending some time cultivating and probably most of your time correcting your child. So stop the correcting and start focusing on connecting. And once you've connected, then start to increase the cultivation. And so connect with your child, just spend time with them, do the things that they love. And when they feel safe, then they will be open to you. Because until they are open, anything you say is just going to go in one ear, out the other.
And from Islamic point of view, I mean, the nurturing of child is divided in 3 7-year groups. First 7 year, play. Let them play. Don't teach them. Let them play. Second 7 years, educate them. Everything, give them education. And third 7 years, be friends with them and correct them by friendship and equal discussions.
Yes, definitely. So, we've come to the end of the show now. Thank you and Jazakallah to our respected guests, brother Razwan, Faraz, as well as Syed Muhammad Razavi, for your inspiring and wise words, as well as all our viewers for joining us in this week's Open Dialogue. Please join us again, same time, same place, for another informative open dialogue. From me,